He was the kid who stared at the page and saw a battlefield of letters that wouldn't stay still, the one who copied his friends' answers, because sounding out the questions made his chest tighten. At 7, they called him lazy. At 10, they called him slow. By 12, they stopped calling on him at all. He sat in the back of the room, memorized patterns, faked smiles, and learned the cruelest lesson of all. If you can't read, people stop listening. But Eli Turner never stopped dreaming, not even when the letters made no sense, not even when the world left him behind. Because deep down, he knew his story wasn't missing. It just hadn't been written yet. This is the journey of a boy they tried to write off, who picked up the pen anyway, and in doing so, taught the world to read differently. From the very beginning, school felt like a trap. While other kids opened picture books and sounded out, "cat," Eli opened his and saw chaos. Letters that flipped, lines that shimmered, words that didn't just confuse him, they moved. D became B, M and W spun like wheels, and sentences, they curled into knots before he could finish the first one. At first, he thought it was normal. Everyone squinted, right? Everyone blinked 3 times and rubbed their eyes before guessing the answer. But soon it became clear they weren't struggling. He was. Reading groups became panic attacks. Popcorn reading turned into punishment. He'd count ahead in class, trying to predict which paragraph might land on him, and silently pray for the bell to ring before it did. He started memorizing what books looked like, not what they said. He could recognize Goosebumps by the cover art, but couldn't tell you what was inside. Every red mark on his worksheet felt louder than the teacher's voice. Every sigh from a classmate felt like a spotlight. And every time someone said, "Sound it out," it felt like they were asking him to climb a wall with no foothold. He tried over and over again. He tried, but the harder he pushed, the more the letters pushed back. At home, his parents didn't know what to do. They read with him, got flashcards, posted the alphabet on the fridge, but nothing worked. His mom would say, "You're smart, Eli. You just need to focus." But that's what hurt the most. He was focused, so focused his head hurt by the end of every school day. At 7, he was already behind. At 8, they called in a tutor. At 9, the tutor said maybe it wasn't effort, maybe it was something deeper, but the school said no. He's not failing badly enough. He'll catch up. Except he didn't, and slowly Eli began to believe what the silence around him was already saying. You're not smart enough. You're not fast enough. You're not enough. So he got quiet, stayed small, and let the world move on without him. But inside that quiet boy, buried beneath the confusion, there was a mind full of stories. They just hadn't found their way out yet. By the time Eli reached middle school, he had learned how to disappear. He sat in the last row near the window where teachers rarely looked and classmates didn't notice. He kept a pencil in hand, a notebook open, filled with doodles, not notes, and when someone cracked a joke, he laughed, even when he didn't understand it, because silence invited suspicion. He wasn't dumb, he was just tired of trying to read signs on the wall, tired of pretending the words on the board made sense, tired of people telling him he just needed to practice. But how do you practice when the letters run away from you every time you look? Every once in a while, a teacher would call on him, their voice echoing like a spotlight. He'd freeze, try to fake it, guess the word by the shape of the letters. Sometimes he got lucky, mostly he didn't. The class would go quiet. Then came the whispering, the eye rolls, the laughter no one owned. And every time it happened, Eli shrank just a little more until he became a shadow. He wasn't the loud kid, not the star athlete, not the straight A student. He was just there, a name on a roster, a face in the back, a boy teachers passed over when asking for volunteers. But what no one knew, what not even Eli fully understood, was that while he sat in silence, his imagination was loud. Every time he stared at a page he couldn't read, he built scenes in his head. Not words, but images. Stories and pictures. Characters with voices he'd never heard on paper. And in that silence, something extraordinary was happening. Not success, not yet, but resistance. Because even though he didn't raise his hand, even though he had every reason to quit, he kept showing up. And one day, when a substitute teacher handed him a detention slip by mistake, everything changed. It happened in the most unexpected way. A substitute teacher, new to the school, unfamiliar with the faces, mistakenly slipped Eli a detention slip. He stared at the paper, confused. Disruptive, it read. Eli hadn't said a word all class. He never did. He tried to protest, his voice small, uncertain, but she pointed to the name. See, it says Eli Turner, and for the first time in his life, he didn't guess. He didn't run. He read, slowly, painfully, but out loud. E-L-I-T-U Turner, he stammered. The teacher froze. Her eyes widened, not in judgment, but in realization. You can't read this, can you? Eli went still. Shame washed over him like heat. He didn't answer. And then, she didn't send him to detention. She sat down, took a breath, and said, "That's not your fault." 4 words, simple, but they cracked something open. She called in the school counselor. The counselor called his parents. And for the first time, someone looked deeper. A full evaluation, testing, weeks of appointments. Then came the answer, dyslexia, severe. For Eli, it was like learning a secret about himself that finally made everything make sense. The frustration, the migraines, the mental exhaustion of pretending. It wasn't laziness, it wasn't stupidity. It was his brain processing language in a different way. There wasn't a cure, but there was a path, a strategy, a plan that didn't start with, "Why can't you?" but with, "Here's how we can." Eli was paired with a reading specialist named Ms. Harlan. She didn't ask him to keep up. She asked him to start where he was, and she didn't judge how long it took. She celebrated every word he wrestled to the page. At first, the victories were tiny. Reading a sentence, recognizing a pattern, understanding that was doesn't rhyme with has, even though it should. But something even bigger was changing. For the first time, Eli didn't feel alone. He wasn't the shadow in the back anymore. He was someone worth noticing, someone with a name, and now a diagnosis that didn't define him, but gave him direction. And with that direction, Eli made a choice. He wasn't going to hide anymore. He was going to fight, letter by letter, line by line, to build a future that fit him. He was 15 when it happened. The creative writing teacher, a wiry man with glasses and an old leather satchel, walked in one Monday and said, "Your next assignment is to write a short story. Not for a grade, for you. Something true, something you've never said out loud." Eli's stomach dropped. Write? By myself? Pages? His fingers twitched just thinking about the keyboard. Even now, reading still felt like wading through wet cement. But something about that challenge lit a fire. For the first time, he didn't want to write for a score. He wanted to say something. So he stared at the blinking cursor on his family's old laptop and did something he'd never done before. He opened voice to text. The words came slow at first, choppy, hesitant, but they came, and they were real. He told the story of a boy who sat in the back of the class, who memorized the rhythm of teachers' shoes so he could avoid eye contact, who lived in a world where every page was a mountain, but who never stopped climbing. He called the story "The Boy in the Quiet Corner." It wasn't polished, it wasn't pretty, but it was raw, honest, and his. He didn't put his name on it. Too afraid, too vulnerable. He printed it, folded the pages tight, and dropped them anonymously into the submission pile. A week later, his teacher stood at the front of the class with a copy of the story in hand. "I want to read something to you," he said, "and I hope the author doesn't mind." Eli's heart stopped. As the teacher read, the class went silent. Not the bored waiting kind of silence, the leaning in kind, the kind that says, "We hear you, we feel you, we see you." By the final paragraph, one girl was wiping her eyes. Another kid muttered, "That was wow." And for a split second, Eli let himself believe, maybe I did that. Later that day, his teacher slipped a note into his hand. "Whoever wrote that story, don't stop. The world needs your voice." Eli folded the note slowly, held it like something sacred, because it wasn't just feedback. It was the first time someone told him, "Your story matters." And for the first time in his life, he believed it might be true. From that day on, something shifted in Eli. The boy who once flinched at written instructions began carrying a notebook everywhere he went, not to copy what others said, but to write what he saw. He wrote in bursts, raw sentences, fragmented thoughts, dialogue he heard on the bus. None of it perfect, all of it his. His handwriting was messy, his spelling still stumbled, but now he didn't care, because for the first time the words weren't his enemy. They were tools, and he was learning how to use them. He joined a writing group, quiet at first, but always present. When it came time to share, he offered to go last, then second to last, then finally, first. People listened. One girl told him his story felt like her own. A boy with a stutter said, "You write like I talk." It made me feel normal. Eli realized something. His learning difference wasn't just a burden, it was a lens, a way of seeing the world others couldn't. He didn't write like a straight A student. He wrote like a survivor. Every sentence earned, every paragraph built like a bridge from pain to possibility. And the more he wrote, the stronger his voice became. At 17, he entered a national youth writing competition. He almost didn't submit. Imposter syndrome still whispered, but he did. With shaking hands, he clicked submit on a story titled Unspoken Words. 3 months later, he got the email. Finalist. They invited him to speak at the conference, to read his story out loud, on stage, into a microphone. He almost said no, but then he remembered the boy he used to be, the one who sat in the quiet corner, and he knew he had to say yes. The night of the reading, his palms were sweaty, his stomach churned. He looked out at a room full of strangers, and then he spoke. Not perfectly, not without fear, but with power. And when he finished, the applause wasn't just for the story, it was for the boy who wrote it even when the world said he couldn't. Eli Turner never became a best-selling author. He didn't need to, because his greatest story wasn't found on a bookstore shelf. It was written in the courage it took to pick up a pen when everyone else had already written him off. He once believed he was broken, too slow, too far behind. But the truth was simpler and so much more powerful. He wasn't failing, he was fighting. And in that fight, he discovered a voice not even dyslexia could silence. Today, Eli teaches kids who learn differently, not with red pens or rigid rubrics, but with patience, with empathy, with the kind of understanding you can only offer when you've walked through the storm yourself. And the same notebook he once used to hide his pain, it's now filled with letters from students who say, "I didn't think I could do it until you showed me I could." Because Eli's story isn't just about learning to read, it's about reclaiming your narrative when the world tries to tell it for you. It's about believing, truly believing, that your voice matters even if it takes longer to find. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt like you're too far behind, too different, too lost, too unseen, remember this: you are not the sum of your struggle. You are the strength that rises through it. And sometimes the most powerful story you'll ever tell is the one they said you never could. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below if you've ever felt like Eli. And subscribe for more stories that prove you don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You just have to keep going.